At the beginning of 1987, Megadeth went on tour with Alice Cooper in support of his new album, Constrictor. Dave Mustaine and David Ellefson were huge fans of Alice and kept trying to meet him. After some of Megadeth's antics on tour, they were told after a show that Alice was willing to see them. The guys sobered up as much as they could and went up to his bus. Alice turned out to be calm and genuinely nice. When the conversation shifted to partying, he said he used to drink a bottle of whiskey a day and warned them, "I've seen it all, I've been through it all, it just doesn't work. You won't be able to keep up that pace. You'll either burn out or die." The guys listened respectfully and nodded, but each kept his own opinion. Warnings only work until you start yourself. Toward the end of the tour, Megadeth agreed to record a song for the soundtrack to the movie Dudes, starring Flea, John Cryer, and Lee Ving. The film was directed by Penelope Spheris. A re-recorded version of These Boots sounded even better. By this point, relationships within the band had deteriorated badly. It became harder and harder to find Gar before soundcheck or even before the show. He would disappear somewhere in the red light district, and getting him back took time. One day in Detroit, before a show, a young guy approached Dave and offered to help tune the drums. His name was Chuck Behler, and it turned out he knew what he was doing. That same day, Chuck joined the crew as drum tech. Not only could Chuck tune the drums, he could also quickly step in and play Gar's parts. This helped a lot when Gar missed soundcheck. As soon as the tour ended, Chuck officially took over as Megadeth's drummer. At the same time, Chris Poland was also fired. Dave could no longer tolerate their behavior. Their heavy addiction led them to pawn their musical equipment more and more often. At some point, it simply started disappearing. While replacing the drummer went relatively smoothly, finding a guitarist became a problem. It was time to record the new album, and the band settled into Music Grinder Studios. Chuck Behler had an amusing friend, guitarist David White, nicknamed Gadget. One day, they were all sitting in the studio listening back to the recorded material, and everything seemed to be going pretty well. David Ellefson said, "So far, so good." Then Gadget, taking a drag from his cigarette, replied, "So what?" They immediately thought it was brilliant. The phrase stuck and eventually became the album title. Once the basic tracks were finished, the issue of lead guitar solos became a serious problem. Ellefson suggested his friend Jay Reynolds, whom he used to hang out with at bars. Jay played in Malice. When Mustaine first saw him, he thought Jay looked like a perfect fit. He was tall and thin, with long blonde hair and wore knee-high boots. Jay joined Megadeth at Music Grinder, but he didn't rush to record his guitar parts. When it was his turn, he suggested bringing in his guitar teacher to record the solo and then teach Jay how to play it. It seemed Jay was happy to be in Megadeth, but couldn't handle the job. Dave was stunned. The problem was that studio time had already been paid for, so they had no choice but to bring in the teacher. His name was Jeff Young, and he turned out to be an excellent player. Jeff lived upstairs from Jay in a building in West Hollywood and had been giving him free guitar lessons. Once Jay got into Megadeth, he offered Jeff $50 an hour to help him break down Chris Poland's solos and come up with new parts for the album. With only 2 weeks left before recording, it became clear Jay played at the level of an average rhythm guitarist. Hearing Poland's solos, Young knew Jay would never be able to play them, especially not in 2 weeks. At that time, Jeff was already planning to leave Los Angeles. One day, returning home, he saw his answering machine blinking. The message was from Dave Mustaine, inviting him to the studio to talk. The next day they met, and Dave handed him a cassette with a section of In My Darkest Hour that needed a solo. He said, "Start here, end there. See you tomorrow." Jeff had one night to come up with ideas. He had just graduated from GIT and was in top form. He showed up at the studio the next day. The entire band, including Jay Reynolds, was already there. Jeff stood at the back of the room with his back to everyone. The tape rolled, and he played what would end up in the final version. Everyone in the studio was blown away. The next day, he recorded Hook and Mouth, Liar, and 502. Jeff would go into another room for 30 minutes, come back, and record immediately. There were no rehearsals, and he had never even heard the songs in full. It was all improvisation, but the solos fit perfectly. Mustaine and Ellefson discussed it and decided Jeff should be Megadeth's guitarist. But there was one issue. Jay looked the part, but couldn't play, while Jeff played great, but looked like a beach surfer. So Dave offered Jeff the spot on the condition that his image matched the band's style. They called it Rock School 101. Jeff agreed. Dave then had to call Jay Reynolds and tell him he was out. By that time, due to the lack of a second guitarist, Ellefson had been playing a lot of guitar himself. He wrote riffs for Hook and Mouth and parts of Liar, and also contributed to In My Darkest Hour and Mary Jane. Later, he even picked up more guitar knowledge from Jeff during the tour, as they shared a room. Finally, the album included the very first song Dave had started writing after being fired from Metallica. Originally titled Megadeth, also known as No Survivors, it eventually took its final form as Set the World Afire. Traditionally, the third album would include a cover. Dave had always been a fan of punk rock and loved Sex Pistols. One of his favorites, Problems, seemed like the perfect choice. But as with previous albums, Dave followed advice from Jay Jones, who suggested Anarchy in the UK. Steve Jones was invited to play on the track. He agreed immediately and showed up in the studio the next day, even with his arm in a cast from a motorcycle accident. When it came to payment, he asked for $100 and some suction. Dave decided that $1,000 would be enough. Meanwhile, Mustaine and Ellefson appeared in The Decline of Western Civilization, The Metal Years, directed by Penelope Spheris. In My Darkest Hour was included in the film's soundtrack. To handle the mixing of the new album, Capitol Records brought in Paul Laney, known for working with Rod Stewart. But Megadeth was a thrash metal band, requiring a completely different approach. Dave was skeptical. As the project neared completion, Lonnie suggested moving to Bearsville Studios for fresh inspiration. Founded in 1969, it had a strong reputation. Artists like Bob Dylan, Janis Joplin, and the band had worked there. As with previous albums, Mustaine was deeply involved in production. He and Lonnie went to Bearsville, alone in a rural setting. Soon, Dave grew impatient and increasingly irritated. Even the arrival of Raven, whom Dave partied with, didn't help. At one point, he decided Lonnie wasn't right for the band. One morning, after seeing Lonnie outside in his underwear feeding a deer, Dave bought a plane ticket and flew back to Los Angeles. To finish the mix, they brought in German engineer Michael Wagener, who had worked with many rock and metal acts, including Metallica on Master of Puppets. Still, it didn't fix everything. The album's sound came out muddy, with excessive reverb. Music critics didn't embrace the album. There were also negative reviews, which upset Dave, but he tried not to let it get to him.